My name is Elias Vance. I am 62 years old, and at my only daughter's wedding, she introduced me to her new wealthy family as a pathetic failure. She thought I was just a simple, broke old man who fixed books for a living. She had no idea that my quiet life had made me a multimillionaire. She also had no idea that I was carrying a final message from her late mother ready to play for all her guests. A message that would not only change her life but would also test the very meaning of the word legacy. By the end of my toast, she would learn that some promises are more binding than any law, and that a father's love can sometimes be a very sharp blade. Before I tell you what was in that message and how a room of 150 people fell into a silence so deep you could hear a heartbreak, please let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you have ever had to teach someone a lesson they would never forget, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. You will want to hear how this ends. The wedding was held in a place designed to make you feel poor, a sprawling vineyard estate in Napa Valley, where the setting sun made the rolling hills look like they were dusted with gold. Every detail, from the string quartet playing softly on the lawn to the glasses of champagne that seemed to magically refill themselves, was a testament to the Prescott family's immense wealth. And I, Elias Vance, in my simple dark wool suit that had been tailored to fit me perfectly 20 years ago, was a smudge on a beautiful painting. I could feel it the moment I arrived. It wasn't in anything anyone said, at least not at first. It was in the architecture of the evening itself. The seating chart was the first clue. The main family was at a long regal table that ran along the head of the grand pavilion, adorned with a waterfall of white orchids. My table 19 was tucked away near the back, a small circular island in a sea of strangers. My name card was placed between a third cousin of the Prescott clan, who sold luxury yachts, and his wife, who looked straight through me when I introduced myself. The message was clear, written in elegant calligraphy on expensive cardstock. You are here because we have to invite you, but you do not belong. It was a subtle, carefully planned humiliation, the kind of cruelty only the very rich can afford to practice with such effortless grace. I decided not to let them make me invisible. I left my table and walked toward the head of the room, my worn leather shoes sinking slightly into the plush lawn. I wanted to congratulate my new son-in-law Leo and his mother Catherine Prescott. Catherine was a woman who wore her fortune like armor. Her smile was perfectly crafted, but it never reached her eyes. When I offered my congratulations, she gave me a nod so slight, it was almost imperceptible. "Thank you, Elias," she said, her voice smooth as glass. Her eyes, however, were not looking at my face. They had flickered down to my wrist, to the simple steel Omega I wore. It was my father's watch, a timepiece from 1958, elegant and understated. But it wasn't a Patek Philippe. It wasn't a statement. To her, it was a confession of my modest means. In that single glance, she had assessed my net worth and dismissed me. Before I could say another word, she had turned her back on me to embrace a state senator who had just arrived. I was left standing alone in her wake. Leo saw me. I saw the flash of panic in his eyes. He was a good kid, I thought, but he was a ship without a rudder, guided entirely by the gravitational pull of his mother's expectations. He hurried over, his hand outstretched. "Elias, so glad you could make it. The place is amazing, right?" He spoke quickly, his words tumbling over each other, but his attention was elsewhere. He kept glancing over his shoulder at his mother. Catherine made a tiny, almost invisible gesture with her hand, a flick of her fingers, and Leo's smile faltered. "I'm so sorry, I have to. The photographer needs us." He scurried away, leaving me once again on the outside looking in. I walked away from the table, the cheerful music of the string quartet suddenly sounding thin and hollow. Across the lawn, I saw her, my daughter, Jessica. She was bathed in the golden light of the setting sun, a champagne flute in her hand, laughing at something one of her new friends had said. Diamonds glittered at her throat. She looked like a princess from a fairy tale. And in that moment, a memory sharp and painful cut through the noise of the evening. Jess, age 10, standing in my workshop. The air smelled of old paper and leather, and the faint, sweet scent of bookbinding glue. She was holding a drawing she had made for me, a crayon portrait of me hunched over my workbench, carefully stitching a new spine onto a worn copy of Moby Dick. Her small hands were smudged with green and brown from drawing the books that lined my shelves. Beneath the picture, she had written in shaky, proud letters, "My daddy, the book doctor." I remembered the look on her face when she gave it to me, a look of pure, undiluted pride. She wasn't ashamed of my dusty workshop then. She saw magic in what I did. She saw a hero. I looked back at the woman across the lawn, the stranger in the designer dress, and a profound sadness settled in my chest. Where did that little girl go? When did she trade that pride for diamonds? I retreated to the anonymity of table 19. The Prescott cousins were debating the merits of summering in the Hamptons versus Martha's Vineyard. I didn't join in. I just picked up my water glass and felt the smooth, worn gold of my wedding ring against the cold crystal. It was a habit, a small, unconscious gesture that always brought Clara back to me. My Clara. The memory of her was as vivid as if she were sitting right beside me. The sterile white hospital room. The relentless, rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. Her hand in mine, so fragile but still so warm. Her voice was a whisper, tired but clear as a bell. "Jess has a good heart, Eli," she had said, her eyes fixed on mine. "But she's a magpie. She loves shiny things. This world she's entering, the Prescott world, it's very, very shiny. They will try to change her." She squeezed my hand. "Promise me you'll be her compass. Promise me you won't let her lose her way. Even if the lesson is hard. Protect her from her own worst instincts, Eli. Promise me." I had promised. And in the 5 years since she had been gone, I had tried to keep that promise. I had watched silently as Jess drifted further and further away from the values we had raised her with, hoping she would find her way back on her own. But tonight I felt a cold dread creep into my heart. I was losing her, and my promise to Clara echoed in my soul. The laughter and the music grew louder, becoming a suffocating wave of noise. I needed air. I found a small stone archway that led to a secluded terrace away from the main celebration. The air here was cool and smelled of damp earth and blooming night jasmine. I leaned against the stone balustrade, looking out over the dark, sleeping vineyards, and for the first time all evening, I felt like I could breathe. And then I heard their voices. They were just around the corner, their figures silhouetted by the light spilling from a nearby window. Jess and her mother-in-law, Catherine. They thought they were alone. Catherine's voice was like ice. "Darling, I do hope your father doesn't plan on making a long speech. His tie is, well, it's very quaint. Did you offer to buy him a new suit?" I heard Jess give a nervous little laugh. It was the laugh I knew so well, the one she used when she was trying to impress someone, when she was afraid she wasn't good enough. "I did, Catherine. I sent him a gift card to Nordstrom weeks ago. But you know Dad. He's always been frugal." She paused, and her next words were quieter, laced with a venom that shocked me. "Honestly, I'm just hoping he doesn't embarrass me tonight." "It's a shame," Catherine mused, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "He seems like a nice enough man, but completely out of his depth. No real drive." Then came the final blow. The words that would echo in my mind for the rest of the night. Jess's voice, now confident, trying to sound like one of this, trying to cement her place in their world by sacrificing me. "He is what he is," she said with a dismissive sigh. "My father is just a pathetic failure, really. No ambition, nothing like you. He's happy in his dusty little world. I suppose someone has to be." Pathetic failure. The words hung in the cool night air, sharp and cruel. It wasn't just an insult. It was an assassination of my character. an erasure of a lifetime of love and sacrifice. I stood frozen on that terrace, the scent of jasmine suddenly nauseating. In that moment, all the small slights of the evening, the seating chart, the dismissive glance, the hurried conversation, coalesced into a single, ugly truth. My daughter was ashamed of me. The little girl who called me her hero was gone, and I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone what my promise to Clara now required me to do. After the main course was cleared, a man in a tuxedo who served as the evening's master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage. He tapped the microphone, and a polite chime echoed through the pavilion, silencing the low hum of conversation. "Friends, family," he announced with a practiced, warm voice, "it's time for our toasts to the happy couple." A wave of cheerful applause followed. From my seat at table 19, I watched as the best man, a young man with slicked back hair and a smile that seemed too wide for his face, made his way to the stage. He raised his glass. To Leo, he began, his voice booming with the easy confidence of someone who had never known a day of hardship. "Man, what can I say? From the ski slopes of Aspen to that disastrous yachting trip in Monaco, we've seen it all." The crowd chuckled knowingly. "I've seen this guy talk his way out of trouble with the authorities in 3 different languages, but I've never seen him as speechless as the day he met Jess. And looking at the life you guys are building, the new house in Pacific Heights, the Porsche in the driveway, I'd say you finally pulled off the greatest deal of your life." To Leo and Jess, more applause. I took a slow sip of water. The speech wasn't a tribute to a friend. It was a checklist of assets. It was a performance designed to remind everyone in the room of the price of admission to their world. Next came the maid of honor, a friend of Jess's named Chloe. She was a vision in a silk dress, holding the microphone like a seasoned performer. I have known Jess since our freshman year of college. She started, her voice filled with emotion. And I have never seen her happier or more radiant than she has been since Leo and the entire Prescott family came into her life. She turned to Catherine, her eyes shining. "Catherine, thank you. Thank you for welcoming my best friend into your family, for showing her a world of elegance and beauty that she so richly deserved." The words landed like tiny sharp stones. A world she deserved. The implication was clear. The world I had given her was not enough. It was a public declaration that my life, my home, my love had been a starting point, to be escaped from, not a foundation to be built upon. Each speech was another layer of paint, covering up the past, erasing the girl who drew pictures of the book doctor, and replacing her with a woman who belonged to the Prescotts. I watched my daughter's face. She was beaming, her eyes glistening with tears of joy. She saw nothing wrong with any of it. She believed it all. As the maid of honor left the stage, the master of ceremonies stepped back to the microphone, his smile unwavering. "And now a few words from the person who has known our beautiful bride her entire life. Please welcome the bride herself, Jessica." The room erupted in warm, sustained applause. I watched my daughter rise from her seat at the head table. She moved with a grace she hadn't possessed a few years ago, a carefully practiced elegance that was more Prescott than Vance. She didn't look in my direction. Her eyes were locked on the stage, her expression one of focused determination. She was about to give the performance of her life. She took the microphone, her hand steady, the diamonds on her wedding ring catching the light. "Wow," she began, her voice a little breathless. "Just wow. Looking out at all of you, my heart is so full." She turned her radiant smile toward the head table. "First, I have to thank my new family, the Prescotts." Her gaze settled on her mother-in-law. "Catherine, from the moment Leo introduced us, you have been more than a mother to me. You've been a mentor and inspiration. You taught me that a woman can be both strong and graceful, that she can command a boardroom and a ballroom with equal power." My stomach tightened. I thought of Clara, of my wife's quiet strength, her fierce intelligence, the way she ran our household finances with the precision of a CEO, while also finding time to volunteer at the local library. Clara had been the very definition of a strong, graceful woman, but her name was not being mentioned on this stage. It was being written over erased. Jess continued, her voice gaining confidence. You and the entire Prescott family have welcomed me into a life that honestly I used to only read about in magazines. A polite laugh rippled through the audience. I felt a cold stillness spread through my veins. A life she only read about. I remembered the nights I'd spent hunched over rare, crumbling manuscripts, my eyes aching under the magnifying lamp, meticulously restoring a 16th century Bible or a first edition of a classic novel. That work, that slow, painstaking, invisible work, had paid for her private school education. It had paid for her degree from a prestigious university. It had paid for the apartment she lived in, the car she drove. I had given her a life of comfort and opportunity, free of debt, free of struggle. But it was a life built on the quiet dignity of hard work, not the loud pronouncements of wealth. And in her eyes, it was a life not worth mentioning. Then her expression shifted into one of playful mischief. To give you an idea of the world I came from, she said, and my blood ran cold. I have to tell you a quick story about my dad. She gestured vaguely in my direction, a flick of her hand. Last year for our anniversary, Leo bought me my first truly expensive handbag, a beautiful black Prada. I was so proud of it. And of course, within a week, I managed to scuff the corner. She rolled her eyes theatrically. I was devastated. And my dad, bless his heart, she said the phrase dripping with condescending affection. He saw how upset I was and said, "Don't you worry, sweetie. I can fix that." She paused for effect. The next thing I know, he's in his workshop getting out his little pots of archival glue and his specialized leather tools. He was so serious, telling me all about the unique chemical composition of the adhesive he was going to use. She mimicked me squinting in concentration, and a few people at the front tables tittered. The Prescott cousins at my table were now looking at me with expressions of pity. I had to stop him before he turned my Prada bag into a museum piece, she declared, her voice ringing with laughter. I had to gently explain that you don't fix designer leather with bookbinding glue. The room filled with laughter. It was polite, but it was still laughter at my expense. Laughter at my craft. Laughter at the very skills that had provided for her her entire life. I felt the heat rise up my neck, a flush of shame and anger so intense it made my vision swim for a moment. But I held my composure. I sat perfectly still. I became a statue, a monument to a father's obsolete world. Jess let the laughter die down before raising her glass for the finale. She made a show of looking towards my table, though her eyes didn't quite meet mine. "I love you, Dad," she said. The words were a feather light and quick, floating away before they could land. An obligation fulfilled. A box checked. Then she turned her entire body back toward the head table. Her voice changed. It became thick with genuine, powerful emotion. The kind of emotion that had been absent when she spoke of me. But tonight, she said, her eyes locking with Catherine's. I have to thank Leo, and especially Catherine and the entire Prescott family, for showing me a bigger life. A life of substance, of class, of success. She took a deep breath, her smile wider and more brilliant than ever. Tonight, I am so proud to finally be a Prescott. Finally. That was the word that broke me. Finally. As if her entire life as a Vance had been a prelude, a waiting room, an unfortunate but necessary period she had to endure before her real life could begin. The overheard conversation on the terrace had been a private betrayal. This was a public execution. In front of 150 people, my daughter had declared my life, my name, and my love to be insufficient. She hadn't just joined a new family, she had renounced her own. And in that deafening silence that followed the applause, I heard Clara's voice in my memory as clear as day. Protect her from her own worst instincts. Even if the lesson is hard. The decision was no longer a choice. It was a duty. My promise to my wife had come due. The applause that followed my daughter's speech was a roar. It was a wave of sound that washed over the entire pavilion, a resounding unanimous endorsement of her words, of her choice, of her new life. But to me, sitting at table 19, the sound was distorted, as if I were hearing it from the bottom of a deep well. The cheerful faces, the clapping hands, the brilliant smiles, they all blurred into a swirl of color and light, a distant, meaningless pageant. I did not move. I did not flinch. My hands, which had spent 40 years learning the delicate art of mending fragile paper, rested calmly on the white tablecloth, one on either side of my plate. If anyone had bothered to look at the forgotten father in the back of the room, they would have seen nothing. A blank face, a still posture, a man made of stone. Inside my mind, however, a profound and terrible silence had fallen. The shock, the anger, the searing pain of her words, it all vanished in an instant. It was replaced by a stillness that was colder and heavier than any grief I had ever known. It was the stillness of a frozen lake. The storm had passed, and the landscape of my heart was now hard, clear, and unyielding. All emotion had been burned away, leaving behind only a single diamond-hard point of clarity. I finally understood. The time for hoping, for waiting for gentle guidance, was over. My daughter didn't need a father to love her. She needed a father to save her from herself. I lowered my eyes and looked down at the glass of water in front of me. The crystal was cut in a way that fractured the light. I saw my own reflection, but it wasn't me. It was a distorted, wavering caricature. A man with no distinct features, his face broken into a dozen shimmering pieces. In her speech and her story, Jessica had turned me into a ghost. A harmless, simple, invisible man. A relic from a past she had outgrown. And in that moment I accepted the role she had given me. Because an invisible man is free. An invisible man can move without being seen. An invisible man can act without anyone ever suspecting his intentions. The word, finally, echoed in the silence of my mind. Finally, a Prescott. It was a clean cut severing the last thread that connected the woman on the stage to the little girl who drew pictures of the book doctor. But the pain was a strange thing. It didn't spread like a fire. It crystallized. It became an object. Something I could hold, examine, and use. It was the final piece of evidence in a long, sad case I had been building in my heart for years. Clara's voice came back to me then, not as a whisper of memory, but as a clear, firm command. Protect her from her own worst instincts, even if the lesson is hard. I had always thought that meant protecting her from heartbreak, from failure, from the cruelty of the world. I never imagined it meant protecting her from the poison of greed, from the corrosion of her own character. I understood now that a compass doesn't just point north. Sometimes it has to be a mirror forcing you to see the direction you are truly heading. My daughter was lost in a forest of shiny things, and to guide her out, I couldn't just call her name. I had to burn the forest down. The lesson would not just be hard. It would be devastating. But it was the only act of love I had left to give. The MC's cheerful voice cut through my thoughts, pulling me back to the surface. "Let's hear it one more time for Jessica," he boomed. The applause rose again, and he continued. "And now, if everyone will direct their attention to the dance floor, it is time for the bride and groom to cut their magnificent cake." The string quartet began to play a joyful, upbeat tune. The guests began to murmur and shift in their seats, ready for the next piece of entertainment. They were all celebrating a union. I remained seated, my eyes still fixed on my broken reflection in the glass. I was preparing for a reckoning. The cheerful sound of the cake-cutting ceremony faded, and the master of ceremonies took the stage again. His voice, slick with manufactured enthusiasm, echoed through the pavilion, and now he boomed, gesturing in my direction, for a special toast from the man who has watched our bride grow from a little girl into the beautiful woman she is today. Please put your hands together and give a warm welcome to the father of the bride, Mr. Elias Vance. A wave of polite, almost dutiful applause rippled through the room. It was the kind of applause you give a child in a school play full of condescending encouragement. They were expecting a short, tearful, perhaps slightly rambling speech from the simple old man in the back. They were about to be disappointed. I pushed my chair back, the legs making a soft scraping sound on the polished stone floor. It was a small, sharp noise that seemed to cut through the polite clapping. I stood up. My legs felt like pillars of stone. There was no tremor in my hands, no hesitation in my movements. For the first time all night, I felt completely grounded, as if my feet were rooted to the very earth beneath the expensive flooring. I was no longer a guest. I was an instrument of a promise. I began my walk toward the stage, my pace steady and unhurried. The journey felt both incredibly long and incredibly short. As I walked, the room came into focus with a painful, crystalline clarity. I saw the faces turned towards me, a gallery of expressions. Mild curiosity, polite boredom. A few held a look of thinly veiled pity. I saw the Prescott cousins at my table nudge each other, likely whispering jokes about what the old man might say. My eyes found the head table. I saw Catherine Prescott, her posture perfect, her expression a mask of bored annoyance at this interruption to her perfectly curated evening. I saw my son-in-law Leo, who looked vaguely uncomfortable, fidgeting with his cufflinks. And I saw Jessica. She was whispering something to Leo, a small, tight, dismissive smile on her lips. She probably thought I was going to embarrass her further, perhaps by crying, or telling a sentimental story she had long outgrown. She had no idea. My path was not direct. To the surprise of those watching, I made a slight detour, turning away from the steps leading to the stage and heading toward a small, black-draped booth in the corner of the room. This was the nerve center of the evening's production, the home of the audio-visual technician. He was a young man no older than 22, with headphones around his neck, his face illuminated by the glow of a laptop screen. He was focused on his playlist, completely unaware that the script for the evening was about to be irrevocably changed. He looked up, startled, as I stopped in front of his table. "Can I help you, sir?" he asked, his voice polite but confused. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. For a brief moment, the room probably expected me to pull out a crumpled, tear-stained piece of paper with a speech written on it. Instead, my fingers closed around the cool, smooth glass of my smartphone and the small, coiled adapter cable I had placed there that morning. I set them both on the table in front of him. The contrast was stark, the old man in the old suit, with the very new technology. "Son," I said, my voice low, and even just loud enough for him to hear over the soft music. "I need you to do something for me." He took off his headphones. "Sir," I pushed the phone gently towards him. "I need you to connect this to the main projector system. I have a video file I need to play as part of my toast." The technician blinked, his professional composure faltering. "A video?" "Sir, I wasn't told about any video presentations. I don't know if I can patch it in this late." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't plead. I simply met his gaze. My eyes, I am sure, held the weight of the last 5 years of a promise made to a dying woman. "It's a very important message for my daughter." I said the words precise and deliberate. The file is on the home screen. It's named For Jessica. Something in my tone and my unwavering gaze cut through his professional reluctance. He saw this was not a casual request from a bumbling old man. He saw the resolve in my face. He looked from me to the phone and back again. He hesitated for only a second more before giving a single sharp nod. "Okay, sir," he said, his voice now quiet and serious. He picked up the cable. "I'll patch it through. It will be ready on your signal." I gave him a nod of thanks, turned away from the booth, and completed my journey to the stage. The short delay had done its work. The atmosphere in the room had shifted. The polite boredom had evaporated, replaced by a low murmur of confusion and curiosity. Whispers spread from table to table. "What was that about? What is the old man doing?" I saw Catherine Prescott frowning openly, now her perfect evening schedule disrupted. Jessica was no longer smiling. She was watching me, her brow furrowed with a mixture of confusion and a flicker of what looked like anxiety. I ignored them all. I stepped up onto the stage, walked to the podium, and placed my hands on either side of it. I looked out at the sea of expectant faces, my heart beating a slow, steady, and resolute rhythm. The stage was set. I stood at the podium, the polished wood cool and solid beneath my hands. The bright stage lights were like a sun washing out the details of the room, turning the 150 guests into a single blurred sea of faces. I didn't search for my daughter's eyes in the crowd. I didn't look at Catherine Prescott's tightening jaw or Leo's confused expression. Instead, I found the camera. It was positioned on a tripod at the back of the room, a single unblinking red light on its body. That little red light became my focus. It wasn't just a machine recording an event. It was a witness. It was the eye of history, and I was about to set the record straight. I let the silence stretch a moment longer than was comfortable. The low murmur of conversation in the room faltered and then died completely. The only sound was the distant chirping of crickets outside the pavilion. I leaned into the microphone, but I did not raise my voice. I spoke as if I were in my workshop, talking to a single trusted client. "Good evening, everyone." I began, my voice steady and clear, amplified to fill every corner of the room. It was a voice they hadn't heard before. Not the voice of a simple, bumbling father, but of a man who knew the weight of his words. They say a wedding is a day for new promises, a day to look to the future and speak of beginnings. I paused, letting the words settle. We make these promises easily in the light. We promise to love, to honor, to cherish. They are beautiful words, born of hope and champagne, and we should celebrate them. I looked out at the blur of faces. I could feel their collective posture shifting, a sense of unease creeping into the festive atmosphere. This was not the speech they were expecting. But there are other kinds of promises. I continued, my gaze still fixed on that small red light. There are promises that are not made in the sunshine of a wedding day, but in the quiet, sterile light of a hospital room. Promises made when hope is a luxury you can no longer afford. These promises are different. They are heavier. They are not born of hope. They are forged in the certainty of loss. They carry the weight of a life's final wishes, and they bind the living to the dead with a strength that time cannot break. The room was now utterly still. The air was thick with a tense, somber curiosity. The party was over. A different kind of ceremony was about to begin. I took a slow breath and delivered the words that would change the course of the evening and of my daughter's life. Tonight I am not here to talk about new promises. I am here to fulfill an old one, a promise I made to my late wife and Jessica's mother, Clara. I said her name, and it hung in the air, full of a power and a presence that had been absent all night. I had just placed my wife, the woman they had all forgotten, at the very center of this celebration. The stage was no longer theirs. It was mine. I let my wife's name hang in the silent room for a moment, giving it the space and the respect it deserved. I saw a flicker of confusion on Jessica's face. The name Clara was like a word from a forgotten language in this new world of hers. I continued, my voice calm, and measured each word, chosen with the same care I would use to restore a priceless manuscript. My wife Clara was a remarkable woman. She was not impressed by the things that impress most people. She wasn't moved by fast cars or large houses. She was a student of character. She used to tell me that you can learn everything you need to know about a person by watching two things: how they treat someone who can do nothing for them, and how they behave when they think no one is watching. My eyes may have drifted for a second towards the head table, a fleeting, impersonal glance. Clara was a futurist when it came to our family. She could see the possible paths a life might take, the small choices that lead to great destinations, both good and bad. She saw potential, but she also saw peril. And more than anything, she understood the true nature of money. I paused. The room was so quiet I could hear the faint hum of the stage lights. She knew that money is a powerful tool, perhaps one of the most powerful on earth. She knew that, like fire, it could warm a home or it could burn it to the ground. She knew it could be a magnificent gift, a key that unlocks doors to education, to security, to freedom, a way to build a life of purpose and to help others. But she also knew that money could be a curse, I said, my voice dropping slightly, drawing the audience in. She knew it could be a slow-acting poison that rots a person's character from the inside out, a disease that replaces gratitude with entitlement, a sickness that transforms empathy into arrogance and turns a good heart toward the cold, sterile worship of shiny things. She saw how easily the gift could become the curse, and she feared it, not for herself, but for the person she loved most in the world, her daughter. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Jessica shift uncomfortably in her seat. Her smile was gone, replaced by a wary, uncertain expression. Catherine Prescott was no longer bored. She was watching me with a look of intense, analytical suspicion. Because Clara saw both the promise and the peril I went on, she spent years preparing a very specific wedding present for Jessica. It was in her mind the most important gift she would ever give her. It was the culmination of her love, her wisdom, and her hopes for the future. She wanted to be here today to give it to you herself, Jess. I finally looked at my daughter just for a moment. She imagined this day. She wanted to look you in the eye, to hold your hands, and to share the legacy she had so carefully and lovingly built for you. A flicker of something, was it hope, greed, passed through Jessica's eyes. A gift. A legacy. Perhaps this speech wasn't so bad after all. But since she cannot be here to deliver that gift herself, I said, turning my attention back to the unblinking eye of the camera, she entrusted me to do it for her. And I am a man who keeps his promises. I raised my hand slightly and gave a single deliberate nod to the young man at the audiovisual booth. Son, if you would. As my hand dropped, a single bright beam of light shot from the back of the room, cutting through the darkness. The large screen behind the stage, which had been displaying a tasteful monogram of my daughter's and son-in-law's initials, flickered and then came to life. The image that appeared was not a slideshow of happy memories. It was my wife, Clara. She was sitting in my workshop, looking directly into the camera lens. She looked healthy, vibrant, the way she was before the illness began to steal her strength. Her silver-streaked hair was tied back, and she wore her favorite simple blue cashmere sweater. Behind her, the shelves were lined with the tools of my trade and the spines of ancient books, a backdrop of quiet, patient work. The sight of her, so real and so present, hit me with the force of a physical blow, but I held my ground. Her eyes were not smiling. They were clear, serious, and full of a profound maternal love. A collective gasp went through the room. Whispers erupted. Who is that? Is that her mother? I saw Jessica's face, pale and confused, staring at the screen. The room fell silent as Clara began to speak, her voice filling the pavilion, as warm and clear as it was in my memory. Jessica, she said, and her voice was a sound of pure love. My darling Jess, if you are watching this, it means the day we dreamed of for you has finally arrived. You are starting a new chapter, a new family, a new life. Your father and I, we always wanted to give you the very best of everything. I watched my daughter's face soften. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. She thought this was a surprise, a sentimental message from the past, a final blessing from the mother she had lost. She looked at Leo and squeezed his hand, a small, sad smile gracing her lips. Even Catherine Prescott allowed a look of polite, somber sympathy to settle on her features. But we had long conversations, your father and I, about what the best truly means. Clara continued, her voice remaining gentle but firm. It isn't the biggest house. It isn't the fastest car. It isn't the most expensive dress. The best things, the things that truly last, are security, opportunity, and above all, character. And because we wanted to give you the best, we spent a lifetime planning for it. We established a private, irrevocable trust in your name. We called it the Vance Clara Legacy Trust. At the word trust, Catherine Prescott's posture straightened. Her look of sympathy vanished, replaced by one of sharp, focused interest. Over the years, Clara said, we funded this trust with two sources. The first was my own family's inheritance, which was modest but invested wisely. The second, and by far the largest source, was from the profits of your father's work. I heard a few confused murmurs. Clara seemed to anticipate this. A small, knowing smile touched her lips. Your father's dusty little world, as you used to call it, is a kingdom very few people are ever invited to see. While he was fixing books for local libraries and universities, he was also acting as a private consultant and broker for some of the world's wealthiest collectors. That little story you told about him, wanting to fix your handbag. That same glue in his hands has restored medieval manuscripts and first editions worth more than the houses in this neighborhood. Your father's lack of ambition has quietly built a fortune. The current value of the Vance Clara Legacy Trust, my dear Jessica, is $25 million. The silence in the room was no longer somber. It was the silence of complete and utter shock. A series of gasps rippled through the crowd. I heard a wine glass drop somewhere, the sound of it shattering on the stone floor unnaturally loud. I looked at the head table. Catherine Prescott's jaw was literally agape. Her carefully constructed mask of aristocratic boredom had been shattered, and for the first time I saw her for what she was, a woman of rapacious greed. Her eyes, wide and gleaming, darted from the screen to me, then to Jessica. She was looking at my daughter as if seeing her for the first time not as a pretty bride, but as a winning lottery ticket. And Jessica, my daughter, looked like she had been struck by lightning. Her face was as white as her dress. Her hands were covering her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. $25 million. The number just hung in the air, a breathtaking, life-altering sum. On the screen, Clara's expression became stern. The loving mother was replaced by the wise, formidable woman I knew so well. But this money is not a prize to be won. Jessica, she said, her voice now edged with steel. It is a responsibility. It is a tool meant to build a life of purpose, not to fund a life of leisure. And that responsibility comes with conditions. Therefore, in the legal framework of the trust, I designated a single person to oversee it, to guide you, and to protect this legacy from being squandered. I have appointed your father, Elias Vance, as the sole trustee of the fund, with absolute and total discretionary power over the distribution of every single dollar. If the first announcement was a shock, this one was an earthquake. The color drained from Catherine Prescott's face. The avaricious glee in her eyes turned instantly to a cold reptilian fury. Her lips thinned into a hard white line. She understood immediately. Her son had not married an heiress. He had married a dependent. She turned and stared at me, her eyes burning with a hatred so pure it was almost beautiful. She finally saw me not as the simple-minded father-in-law, but as a gatekeeper, a king holding the keys to the treasury she so desperately coveted. Jessica was still reeling, trying to process the first number, not yet grasping the terrifying implication of the second. And this power comes with one final, non-negotiable condition, Clara said, her voice now carrying the full weight of her conviction. It is the heart of the entire trust. It is called the Dignity Clause. She looked directly into the camera, and it felt as though she was looking directly into our souls. This trust was created to support a life of meaning, respect, and love. It is a reflection of our family's core values. Therefore, the legal document states that if at any time the sole trustee determines that the beneficiary, that's you, Jessica, acts in a manner that demonstrates a profound and public disrespect for those core values, If you act in a way that dishonors the family name or shows a deep lack of gratitude and honor towards the parent who sacrificed everything to raise you, then the trustee, your father, has the sole, unilateral, and legal right to immediately and permanently freeze your access to the funds. He is then instructed to redirect 100% of the trust's assets to the institution we chose together, the Library of Congress's endowment for the research and preservation of rare books. And there it was. The trap so lovingly and carefully constructed had been sprung. I watched as the full meaning of Clara's words finally landed on my daughter. I saw the moment of recognition, the dawning horror in her eyes, as her own speech, her own cruel words from just a few minutes ago came rushing back to her. Pathetic failure. No ambition. A bigger life. Bless his heart. Finally, a Prescott. She had publicly, in front of all these witnesses, triggered the very clause that now stood between her and a life of unimaginable wealth. Her face, which had been pale with shock, was now flushed with a deep, burning shame. Her eyes darted from the image of her smiling mother on the screen to the furious, accusing face of her new mother-in-law, and then finally across the vast, silent room they met mine. And in my eyes, she did not find anger. She did not find triumph. She found only a quiet, bottomless ocean of sorrowful finality. On the screen, Clara's face softened one last time, her expression now one of infinite sad wisdom. She was a mother giving her daughter one final painful lesson. "Your words have weight, Jess," she said softly. "They can build your world, or they can destroy your own legacy. Choose them wisely." She held her gaze for a moment longer. "I love you. Always." And with that, the screen went black. The screen went black. The image of my wife, her final loving words still echoing in our ears, vanished into a void. But the silence she left behind was not empty. It was a physical thing. A heavy blanket that smothered the room, pressing down on every guest, stealing the air from their lungs. The cheerful music, the clinking of glasses, the hum of conversation, all of it was gone, absorbed into a vacuum of pure, unadulterated shock. The only sound in the entire vast pavilion was the low, indifferent drone of the air conditioning system, a mechanical heartbeat, in a room where every human heart seemed to have stopped. For a full 10 seconds, which felt like an eternity, no one moved. No one breathed. We were all frozen in the aftermath of a truth that had just detonated in the center of our lives. From my position on the stage, I had a perfect view of the wreckage at the head table. I looked at Catherine Prescott first. The mask of aristocratic grace had not just slipped. It had been violently torn away. Her face was a ghastly shade of white like fine porcelain that had been drained of all its color. Her lips, usually set in a polite, condescending smile, were now a single bloodless line of fury. Her eyes, however, were burning. They were fixed on me, and in their depths I saw a hatred so cold and so pure it was almost hypnotic. She was no longer looking at a simpleton to be pitied. She was looking at an enemy who had outmaneuvered her, a king who had just checkmated her in the middle of her own coronation. She understood everything, the power, the money. The control had just slipped through her perfectly manicured fingers. My gaze moved to my new son-in-law, Leo. The poor boy looked like he had been hollowed out. He was staring at Jessica, his mouth slightly agape, his expression one of profound, bewildered disbelief. His entire world, the solid, predictable world of Prescott wealth and influence, had just been fractured. The woman beside him, the prize he had won, the beautiful asset he had acquired, had just been revealed as something entirely different. He wasn't looking at her with anger, not yet. It was a look of pure, uncomprehending shock, the look of a man who had been told the sky was green and the grass was blue. And then I looked at my daughter. Jessica was a statue carved from ice. She was frozen in her chair, her hand still clamped over her mouth as if to hold back a scream. Her eyes, wide and glassy, were locked on the blank black screen where her mother's loving, disappointed face had been. But I knew she wasn't seeing the screen. She was seeing her own words, hearing her own voice, replaying her speech over and over in the horrified theater of her mind. Pathetic failure. Bless his heart. A bigger life. Finally, a Prescott. Each cruel, thoughtless phrase was now a nail in the coffin of her $25 million future. I could see the terrible calculation happening behind her eyes. I could see the moment the last piece clicked into place, the moment she fully and completely understood what she had done. It was the look of a person watching their life burn down to the ground, knowing with sickening certainty that they were the one who had struck the match. I felt no triumph. There was no pleasure in this victory. There was only a vast, empty ache in my chest. This was the hard lesson Clara had spoken of, the lesson I had prayed I would never have to teach. I looked at the terrified, broken woman who was my daughter, and for a moment, I saw the 10-year-old girl she used to be, the girl who had loved her book doctor father. I hadn't done this to punish her. I had done this to save her. It was a painful, brutal surgery on her character, and I could only hope that what was left after all the poison was cut away was something that Clara would have recognized. Slowly, like flowers turning toward a new sun, the heads of the guests began to move. Their gazes lifted from the head table, from my daughter's shattered face, and drifted across the room to me. One by one, they turned to look at the man on the stage. And in their eyes, I saw the world remade. I was no longer the simple, broke father from the back of the room. I was the quiet man who held the entire story and the entire fortune in the palm of his hand. The silence was their stunned tribute to the new order of things. I stood at the podium for a moment longer, letting the silence cement itself into the foundation of the evening. The black screen behind me was a mirror reflecting the stunned faces of the guests. I gently took the microphone from its stand, my movements slow and deliberate. I held it for a second, feeling its cool metallic weight, before placing it softly back onto the podium. The small, quiet click was the only sound in the universe. It was the sound of a lock turning, of a chapter ending. I looked out, not at any single person, but at the room as a whole, at the wreckage I had created. My gaze passed over my daughter's stricken face, over Catherine Prescott's mask of cold fury, and settled on nothing. I was no longer speaking to them. I was closing a record. "That is your mother's gift, Jessica," I said, my voice calm and even, carrying through the silent room without the need for amplification. "I wish you happiness." There was no sarcasm in my words, no triumph. It was a simple, sorrowful statement of fact. A farewell. And then, before a single person could find their voice to object, to scream, to accuse, I turned my back on the podium and walked away. I did not hurry. I descended the small steps from the stage with a steady, measured pace, my shoes making soft, deliberate sounds on the wood. As my feet touched the grass of the main floor, the spell of silence finally broke. It began not with a shout, but with a sharp, ragged gasp. It was Jessica. Then I heard the sound of a chair scraping violently against the stone floor, and a woman's voice, low and venomous, hissing a single word. Jessica, it was Catherine, her voice a whip crack in the stunned air. I heard a choked sob, the beginning of a hysterical cry. I heard murmurs erupting like wildfire, spreading from table to table as the guests finally found their voices. The chaos was beginning, a storm of my own making. But I did not stop. I did not turn. It was no longer my storm to weather. My path took me directly through the center of the room, a long, straight line to the grand entrance of the pavilion. I kept my eyes fixed on the dark rectangle of the night sky visible through the open doors. That was my destination. That was my peace. I could feel the eyes of every guest on me as I walked. I could feel their shock, their morbid curiosity, their frantic whispers. I was the calm eye of a hurricane of my own creation. Their world had been turned upside down, but my own was finally, after 5 long years, righting itself. I heard my daughter's voice, a broken, desperate cry. "Dad." It was a question, a plea, a single word that contained a universe of regret. For a fraction of a second, my stride faltered. The father in me, the man who had kissed her, scraped knees, and read her bedtime stories, wanted to turn back, to hold her, to say it would all be okay. But I kept walking. The promise I made to Clara was not just to love her, but to be her compass. And sometimes the compass must be cold and hard and unmoving to show the true north. I reached the entrance. I stepped out of the golden, chaotic light of the wedding and into the cool, quiet darkness of the Napa night. Behind me, the muffled sound of a woman screaming in fury and a girl crying in despair began to rise. I did not look back. I had delivered the lesson. The rest of the work was hers to do. The 2 weeks that followed the wedding were the quietest of my life. I did not answer my phone. I did not check my emails. I retreated into the sanctuary of my workshop, the place that had always been my fortress of solitude. Here, the world made sense. The air smelled of history, a rich, comforting blend of old paper-worn leather, and the faint, sweet aroma of my own custom-mixed binding glue. The silence was not empty. It was filled with the patient presence of books that had waited centuries to have their stories preserved. I was in the middle of restoring a 17th-century botanical atlas, the delicate hand-painted flowers on its pages, still vibrant after 400 years. My work required a steady hand and a calm heart, and for the first time in a long time my heart was calm. I had kept my promise. The rest was just noise. The noise arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in the form of a sharp, insistent ringing from my front doorbell. It was a jarring, modern sound in my world of quiet antiquity. I set down my bone folder, wiped my hands on my apron, and walked to the door. I knew who it would be. I had been waiting for them. When I opened the door, the sight was almost pitiful. There on my doorstep stood Jessica and Leo. The radiant, confident couple from the wedding was gone. In their place were 2 exhausted, haunted-looking people. Jessica's expensive clothes were wrinkled, her face was pale and puffy, and her eyes were red-rimmed from what I presumed was days of crying. Leo stood beside her, his shoulders slumped in his $1,000 suit, a look of bewildered misery on his face. They looked like refugees from a world of glitter that had suddenly lost its shine. They were completely out of their element, standing at the entrance to my dusty, quiet kingdom. I didn't smile. I didn't greet them. I simply stepped aside and held the door open. They entered hesitantly, their eyes darting around the workshop, as if they had entered a foreign country. The towering shelves of ancient books, the heavy cast-iron book press in the corner, the neat rows of specialized tools, it was a world they had never bothered to understand. The moment the door closed behind them, Jessica's composure crumbled. "Dad," she began, her voice cracking, and then the words came tumbling out in a frantic, desperate torrent. "Dad, I am so sorry. I can't believe I said those things. It was horrible, it was unforgivable, I swear I didn't mean any of it." Tears streamed down her face, a performance of grief that felt both desperate and hollow. "I was just so nervous. You have to understand. I wanted Catherine to like me, to accept me. It was the pressure, the wedding, I wasn't thinking. Please, Dad. Please, you have to forgive me." Leo just stood there, wringing his hands, a helpless spectator to his wife's unraveling. "She's right, Elias," he mumbled. "We messed up. Royally. We'll do anything to make it right. Anything." I didn't respond. I turned my back on them and walked over to my workbench, picking up the piece of calfskin leather I had been preparing. I ran my thumb over its smooth surface, letting her panicked words fill the space between us, and then fade, absorbed by the silent, watching books. Her apology was all about her. Her nerves, her pressure, her desire to be liked. As her sobs quieted for a moment, my phone sitting on the workbench began to buzz. The screen lit up with a name that had become very familiar over the past 2 weeks, Catherine Prescott. Without looking at Jessica, I picked up the phone and pressed the speaker button. Her voice, artificially sweet and dripping with false concern, filled the workshop. "Elias, dear. It's Catherine. Thank heavens, I've finally reached you. I have been so worried." Her voice was a perfect imitation of sincerity. "Listen, I feel this has all been a dreadful, dreadful misunderstanding. Words were said in the heat of the moment. You know how weddings can be. Why don't you let me take you to dinner at the French Laundry this week? My treat, of course. Just the two of us. We can sort this all out like civilized adults." I listened patiently, my eyes on the leather in my hands, until she had finished her performance. Jessica and Leo looked on, a flicker of desperate hope on their faces. I let the silence hang for a beat before I spoke, my voice calm and final. "Thank you for the offer, Catherine. But no." "But Elias, I insist." She started, her voice losing a fraction of its sweetness. "There is nothing to sort out," I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. "Goodbye." I ended the call, the abrupt click echoing in the quiet room. I had just dismissed the most powerful woman they knew as if she were a telemarketer. The balance of power had never been clearer. I placed the phone back on the bench and finally turned to face my daughter. Her tear-streaked face was now a mask of shock at my dismissal of her mother-in-law. "She has called 12 times, I said, my voice quiet, but it cut through the room with the sharpness of a scalpel. "Leo has called 8 times. You, Jessica, have left 37 voicemails." I looked directly into her eyes, seeing past the tears to the frantic panic behind them. "All of this," I said, gesturing to her, to the tears, to the apologies. "What is it for? Tell me the truth. Are you sorry for the words you said? Or are you simply sorry for the price that came with them?" My question hung in the quiet air of the workshop, demanding an answer that was more than just tears. Jessica's sobs faltered. She looked at me, her eyes wide and searching, and for the first time since she'd arrived, the frantic performance fell away. In its place was a raw, ugly, and honest flicker of terror. She couldn't say it. She couldn't admit that her sorrow was for the lost millions, not for the lost respect. She didn't have to. Her silence was the loudest confession I had ever heard. "I see," I said softly. I turned away from her and walked to the large oak flat-top desk where I kept my official records. I opened a heavy leather-bound ledger. The pages were filled with my neat, precise handwriting, detailing the trust's accounts. This was not a father scolding his child. This was a trustee executing his duty. "Let us be very clear," I began, my voice calm and devoid of emotion. "My personal feelings, my hurt, are irrelevant in this room today. I stand here now as the sole trustee of your mother's estate. My only legal and moral obligation is to uphold the letter, and more importantly, the spirit of her final wishes." I looked at them both. Leo seemed to shrink under my gaze, while Jessica just stared, her face a pale mask of dread. "Your mother's terms were unambiguous, Jessica. Respect is not a commodity to be bought or sold. Dignity cannot be negotiated. The dignity clause within the trust document has been triggered by your public actions. As of this moment, you are in complete breach of the conditions required to be a beneficiary." A small, choked sound escaped Jessica's lips. Leo looked like he was going to be sick. They thought this was the end. I held up a hand. "However," I said, and a sliver of hope returned to their eyes. "Your mother was not a punitive woman. She believed in redemption. She believed that character, if damaged, could be restored through hard work and humility. So I am not closing the door on you forever. But the path back is not easy. It will be the hardest work you have ever done. And the terms are not negotiable." I looked down at the ledger, though I knew the words by heart. I had rehearsed this moment, hoping I would never have to live it. "First," I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. "Effective immediately, all passive financial support from the trust is terminated. The platinum credit card linked to the family account, which I see was used just yesterday for a $500 lunch, has been canceled. The monthly allowance that has been deposited into your account since you turned 21 is stopped. The lease on your luxury apartment in the city, which the trust pays for, will not be renewed when it expires in 2 months. The lifestyle you have known is over. Jessica swayed slightly, and Leo put a hand on her arm to steady her. Second, I continued unmoved. You will both find employment. Real jobs. You will learn what it feels like to earn a paycheck and to make it last an entire month. You will pay your own rent, your own car payments, and your own grocery bills. You will learn the value of $1 because you will have earned it with your own 2 hands. Third, the trust itself is not gone, but your access to it has fundamentally changed. It is no longer a well of cash for a life of leisure. It is now a tool for genuine growth. Should you, Jessica, decide you want to pursue a master's degree, or if you present me with a viable, meticulously detailed business plan for a venture that has meaning and substance, I will review it as the trustee. If it is approved, the trust will pay the institution or the vendors directly. Not a single dollar will ever pass through your personal account without purpose and accountability. I paused, letting the weight of the new reality settle upon them. Then I delivered the final, most important term. And fourth, every Thursday evening at 7 p.m., you will both come here, to this workshop. You will sit with me and with a family counselor I have already retained. We will talk. We will untangle the mess we have made. We will work to rebuild what has been broken. Your financial future, Jessica, is now directly and legally tied to the restoration of our family's dignity. I closed the heavy ledger. The sound echoed in the quiet room. It was the sound of a final judgment. They stood there, stunned into silence. The terms were harsh, but they were not a life sentence. They were a path. This wasn't punishment. This was the compass. Clara had asked me to protect our daughter from her own worst instincts. Her instincts for the easy, the shiny, the unearned, had led her to this very room. This new, difficult road was not a cage. It was a map. A map back to the woman of substance her mother always knew she could be. I had kept my promise. 3 months passed. The seasons began to turn, and the fierce heat of summer softened into the golden light of autumn. My life returned to its quiet, steady rhythm. The calls from the Prescotts had long since stopped. The frantic voicemails were a thing of the past. My world was once again defined by the patient work of my hands, the smell of aging paper, and the peaceful silence of my workshop. I was carefully restitching the spine of a first-edition copy of Moby Dick, the very book my daughter had drawn me working on all those years ago. I had found a kind of peace, a quiet satisfaction, in the aftermath of the storm. The bell above the door chimed softly, a sound I hadn't heard in weeks. I looked up from my work, expecting a delivery man. But it was Jessica standing hesitantly in the doorway. I almost didn't recognize her for a second. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by a simple blouse and work slacks. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore very little makeup. The frantic, haunted look in her eyes had been replaced by a quiet, weary calm. She was holding a small, plain lunchbox. She didn't launch into apologies or pleas. She simply walked over to my workbench, her steps soft and uncertain. "Hi, Dad," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was on my lunch break. I brought you something. I figured you'd probably forget to eat again." She placed the lunchbox on a clear space on the bench next to a stack of marbled end papers. I looked at the box, then at her. I gave a single slow nod. "Thank you, Jess," I said. The words felt new, like the first green shoots of spring pushing through a frozen ground. I expected her to leave, to retreat back into the new, harder life she was building for herself. But she didn't. She walked over to the corner and pulled out the old worn wooden stool, the one she used to sit on as a little girl, watching me for hours as I worked. She sat down a few feet away from my bench and simply folded her hands in her lap. She didn't speak. She just watched my hands as I worked her expression, quiet and thoughtful. The silence between us was no longer a weapon or a wall. It was just space. A quiet, peaceful space where something new might have a chance to grow. After a few minutes, I set down my needle and thread. I picked up the lunchbox and opened it. Inside was a simple turkey sandwich on rye bread and a crisp red apple. It was exactly the lunch I would have packed for myself. I took a bite of the sandwich. It was the best thing I had tasted in years. As I ate, I watched my daughter, who was now looking around the workshop, at the silent, towering shelves of books, at the neat rows of tools. She was seeing it not as a dusty, pathetic world, but as a place of substance, of meaning. Her world. My gaze drifted to the small silver-framed photograph of Clara that always sat on my desk. Her smile seemed to catch the afternoon light. I looked from her picture back to our daughter, sitting so quietly in the place where our family began. The path ahead for her would be long and difficult, but for the first time in a very long time, she was on the right road. The lesson had been delivered. The fever had broken. My promise was kept. The true legacy, not of money, but of character, of dignity, of a love strong enough to be hard, had been restored. And in the quiet of my workshop, that was more than enough. This story teaches that a person's true worth isn't measured by their bank account, but by their character and integrity. It powerfully illustrates that true strength lies not in avoiding conflict, but in upholding one's dignity even through difficult decisions. The most profound love can sometimes mean teaching a hard lesson to protect someone from their own worst instincts. Ultimately, the story reminds us that a legacy of respect and self-worth is a far greater inheritance than any amount of money, a fortune that can never be truly lost or taken away. If you believe that character is more valuable than cash, like this video, subscribe for more stories, and share a time you had to stand up for your own worth in the comments below.